Last week I asked whether it might be useful to think of Kannon, Avalokiteshvara, as the Bodhisattva as normally described of great compassion, or rather of great caring. And rather than being a strictly either or thing, my point was really that if we think about Kannon in terms of care and caring, we invite a relationship with really a new version of the discipline of ethics, which has explored a way of thinking about ethics which I think is far more in tune with the traditional way that we developed the idea of the precepts in Zen, but I think can take it too a lot further, can help us think more widely and more deeply, while remaining true to the same fundamental approach towards ethics. And I mentioned last time, really we can date the beginning of this new kind of cross-disciplinary approach to ethics to Carol Gilligan's 1982 book, In a Different Voice. And just to recap briefly there, she was investigating, amongst other things, what her supervisor at university had, to his own satisfaction, demonstrated that around the age of puberty, boys suddenly shot ahead in their moral development of girls who were somewhat backward and confused by comparison. And Gilligan set about testing this and saying, well, what do we actually mean by this? There's one classic story, event, which I'll actually describe to you. In actual fact, her book In a Different Voice, almost the central concern of it is actually women in the first trimester of pregnancy who are considering getting an abortion and how they go about working this through within themselves, how they go about making this hugely important decision. Obviously, with the destruction of Roe versus Wade, this is suddenly unbelievably relevant again. But it's continued to be relevant. But actually, the story concerns the other aspect of her research at this point, which was working with these 11-year-olds, boys and girls, and comparing and contrasting how they thought about ethical, moral problems. So she's reviewing the work of her own supervisor, Lawrence Kohlberg, and just looking at his research and her own research following on from this. The dilemma that these 11-year-olds were asked to resolve was one in the series devised by Kohlberg to measure moral development in adolescence by presenting a conflict between moral norms and exploring the logic of its resolution. That's the story. In this particular dilemma, a man named Heinz considers whether or not to steal a drug which he cannot afford to buy and steal it in order to save the life of his wife. In the standard format of Kohlberg's interviewing process, the description of the dilemma itself, Heinz's predicament, the wife's disease, the druggist's refusal to lower his price, is followed by the question, should Heinz steal the drug? The reasons for and against stealing are then explored through a series of questions that vary and extend the parameters of the dilemma in a way designed to reveal the underlying structure of moral thought. So, Heinz's wife is 6, and there's the drug with which her life can be saved, but he has no money, and the druggist turns him away, refuses. No money, no drug. Should he steal it? So she's taking the responses of 2 children as central here. Girl, Amy, and boy, Jake. And Jake's smart, there's no question about this. He's only 11, but he's already beginning to get to grips with the idea of abstract reasoning. Jake immediately chooses, yes, he should steal the drug. Why? Well, he has abstract reasons for this. He can think in terms of fairness. He even thinks about what the judge who's going to judge the case if it's brought to court might think. You should definitely give him the lightest possible sentence. Basically, he accepts the terms in which the question's asked. It's an either or. Either you choose one way or you choose the other. And it's framed within justice and the law. And law will, at the end of the day, enforce the judgment. Either he gets sent to prison or he doesn't. It's an isolated event. It's thought of completely in isolation. And in actual fact, it's kind of like a logic problem. And Jake himself says, it's sort of like a math problem with humans. So we're rational. We're dealing in calculus. We're able to think outside strict legality. Is this fair? Is this justice? But ultimately, we're thinking in terms of separation. Is it right or is it wrong? Is he justified to do this or is he not justified to do this? Amy, and it's why her thinking isn't, in Kohlberg's terms, as advanced, as developed as Jake's, responds differently. Asked if Heinz should steal the drug, she replies in a way that seems evasive and unsure. Well, I don't think so. I think there might be other ways besides stealing it. Like if he could borrow the money or make a loan or something, but he really shouldn't steal the drug, but his wife shouldn't die either. Asked why he should not steal the drug, she considers neither property nor the law, but rather the effect that theft could have on the relationship between Heinz and his wife. If he stole the drug, he might save his wife then, but if he did, he might have to go to jail and then his wife might get sicker again and he couldn't get more of the drug and it might not be good. So they should really just talk it out and find some other way to make the money. Seeing the dilemma not a math problem with humans, but a narrative of relationships that extends over time, Amy envisions the wife's continuing need for her husband and the husband's continuing concern for his wife, and seeks to respond to the druggist's need in a way that would sustain rather than sever connection. Just as she ties the wife's survival to the preservation of relationships, so she considers the value of the wife's life in a context of relationships, saying it would be wrong to let her die because if she died, it hurts a lot of people and it hurts her. Since Amy's moral judgment is grounded in the belief that if somebody has something that would keep somebody alive, then it's not right to not give it to them. She considers the problem in the dilemma to arise not from the druggist's assertion of rights, not from something that is his, but from his failure of response, his failure to engage in relationship. Now, of course, we can't hang a whole new tradition of ethics on one anecdote, but it does point up beautifully and brilliantly a fundamentally different way of approaching ethical problems and resolving them. Amy thinks relationally instead of isolated individuals with rights or lack of rights. She thinks of process rather than judging a single event. She thinks in the long term. She thinks in a way that's both lateral and open-ended rather than, well, that's the answer. And she doesn't immediately jump and choose one or the other. And for her, it's not withholding that's important, not separate. And so, Gilligan argued, this is in actual fact a different way of grounding our ethical responses. Hence the title of her book, In a Different Voice. Which then, of course, raises the very obvious question, well, why would an 11-year-old girl, well, actually, she's taking this as characteristic of the girl she's talking to responses, have such a different response from this very rational response of the 11-year-old boy who's been seen as reaching a kind of obviously very masculine-based moral maturity. And in terms of the response to this book, obviously you can go in two different directions. Either you say, well, yes, girls are just naturally more caring, obviously. And so this difference needs to be appreciated. We need to develop a separate way of thinking. Obviously, this comes out of girls' natural responses. That's a kind of men and women are different version of feminism. Or we say, well, actually, this is just to do with the repression, the suppression of women in our society. They're not capable of thinking in the strictly objective, rational way that men do because they're not allowed to compete in the same way. They're not allowed to succeed and get to the same level. They're kept down into caring roles, which is to say that women should be more like men. And if they were, their moral evolution would be somewhat different. Obviously, as always, I'm caricaturing relentlessly and unfairly. But you see this almost diverging approaches. And it would be fair to say that Gilligan herself wasn't really quite sure what this actually meant. Well, this is the deal, but what do you do with it? 40 years of research later, and a lot of elaboration on the part of so many different people in so many different traditions. Her way of thinking has evolved in a way which is maybe not so different from the way I've been trying to frame our fundamental issue of how we come to be the beings that we are within our current society. Either we see justice. Well, no, let's take this back one stage further. If we're in a society characterised by a certain violence, it's ultimately a violence which is guaranteed by the law itself. That's the characteristic of the law, that it can be enforced. And the only guarantee of that enforcement is itself the willingness of the state, the legal system, to use violence. Equally, this is a strictly rule-governed system. We can say that the law is simply consistent with itself. We can ultimately say, well, the law this is God's law. Come on, there's no alternative to this. There is right and there is wrong, and ne'er the twain shall meet. This way of thinking is about judgment. It's about control. It's about closure. And I think in a lot of the work that we've been doing with the precepts, we can see how we internalize this view of right and wrong and good and bad, and that everything has to be thought of in terms of a judgment. Yes or no, black or white, always. And the result of that, internalizing this judgment, so that for us the judgment has always been made, and actually our powerlessness is that we've always been found guilty, we've always been found failing, we've always been found lacking. And so we live in shame and we live in fear. Fear of those parts of ourselves that don't conform to this abstract standard, and fear of the other, and they're not conforming to this abstract standard, and therefore their threat, because we see things as fundamentally separate, good and bad, us and them, right and wrong. It's fixed, it's rule governed, it's rational, but it's also a repression. It invites us to repress so much in our attempts to live life in this way. Care ethics offers us a different way of thinking, a different approach to this. I've mentioned before Joan Tronto, important philosopher who's developed this and clarified a lot of the different aspects of that, a lot of the different relationships. But we can say that what's common amongst the whole variety of approaches which sit within care ethics, and it's certainly not monolithic at all, it's been explored by philosophers, by feminists, by sociologists, by ecologists, all working within the same basic field to understand things in different ways. And we can broadly talk about it as following, yes, a vaguely feminist line, but a line of a kind of feminism which is basically about human liberation, because to answer that question which I asked a little while ago, if girls and boys at about the age of 11 are having different kinds of responses at this point, it's basically because the boys have got the idea a little bit faster that no, it's all about rules, it's all about internal repression, it's all about shame and fear. And at this point, the girls are a bit behind them, not actually having made that transition to this fearful, shamed, rule-governed state yet. And a lot of Gilligan's work explores the future development of that. But if we're talking about this legal, judgmental, judicial, abstract approach in terms of ultimately its connection to violence, it's separating out the good guys, the bad guys, events, and isolating, thinking of us purely as isolable individuals, then what the various versions, the various strands of care ethics share is a basis in non-separation, a basis in process, in non-violence. Now, the way that Joan Tronto and others have developed care ethics is very concerned with the nuts and bolts of caring, about who gets to care for who and why and how, and the problems with that. The way that, obviously in care as in everything else, money talks, status talks. Who gets a care pass? Who doesn't? Who isn't expected to care? Who can buy their way out of caring? who can buy the care they wish to receive, and so on and so forth. Why is it that caring has been seen as women's work and women undervalued within our society? The arguments are complex, they ramify. A lot of it comes down to domination, patriarchy, the power of money, the organisation of privileging the economy over caring. But we can explore those other times. But the beautiful point which I want to make about this other way of thinking, this way of thinking which is the opposite of all of that, relational, process-based, open, non-separating, is that it's what we're doing already. All of us in our actual family lives or relationship lives, as parents, children, partners, friends, extended family, sometimes even work colleagues, and so on. We care. We care about things matter to us. And we take care and we are taken care of. Amy wasn't trying to answer Heinz's dilemma out of abstract principles. She was simply trying to think through, well, there's him and there's his wife and there's the druggist. It's a three-way relationship here. These are actual embodied human beings in her version of the story, not an equation, not maths. What might be a way forward, starting from where we are? And with care ethics, we're always starting from where we are. What processes are already in play? What are the problems with these processes? How might we make things go better? With Zen, with ordinary mind Zen in particular, we start from where we are. We start with the experience of this moment, this pain, this random thought, this feeling about the world, this dissatisfaction with myself, this whatever it is. This is the situation. This is the set of relationships which, as of now, I am. And we start from here, not from abstract principles. We start from where we are with what we have. In Bernie Glassman's saying that I love, you make the meal with what you have. These are my ingredients to hand. I make the meal of Zen with these ingredients. And again, we think so often of Zen in terms of spontaneity. No judgment, no decisions, no overthinking. There's the wonderful koan about Avalokiteshvara Kannon. I'm paraphrasing again, what's the action of Kannon like? Oh, it's like somebody reaching behind for a pillow in their sleep. You know, it just happens. It's just what you do. No conscious thought, no, in that sense, no need to be awake. Of course, we can make this into a thing. Oh no, you mustn't think. No, that's so not it. But it's free, natural, spontaneous in that sense. It can involve thought or not involve thought. It's not trying to reason something out from abstract principles. And if we think in terms of care ethics, we can think that in reality our own ethical sense develops over time in response to the many different situations in which we find ourselves. It's not I've got the rules. Though again, when we start working with the precepts, our first response is, tell me what to do, show me the rules. And no, that's not what it's about. It's not about that at all. It's about awareness. It's about bringing our attention, our focus to things because, this is what we're doing anyway. It's just, here are a few extra pointers. Here's an invitation to spend more time feeling this through, thinking this through, responding, rather than just staying with our sets of habitual reactions. It develops slowly in response to our lived relationships, to the ideas which we encounter, to the world around us. It doesn't claim perfection. It's not inventing a perfect world from first principles. It's given this situation, given that these might be the options, what would be helpful? What would be, again, another wonderful Zen term, appropriate action? What would be skillful means at this point? A moment later, a day later, a different situation, our response might be different. Appropriate. And again, there's a tradition of philosophy. Ludwig Wittgenstein talked about the development of a form of life, in the sense of how we can look at everything, our being, the way that we inhabit the world as a whole, as a package, not itemizable into rational elements which we can take out and look at and assess as yes or no, but the way that we develop almost a stance, an approach to life. And of course in Zen, with our Zazen, with our looking at the precepts, this is exactly what we're doing. We're developing, offering a stance, not in response to rules, not in response of having it all thought out for us, but as an active, ongoing process of awareness and response to the world as it's me, as I manifest this world in the relationships of which I'm a part. That this is a non-separate world, a non-separate way of being in the world. And that this is, in a way which perhaps we'll explore further, non-fear. Because it undermines that judgment, always lurking behind us at the back. That sense of law, that sense of violence, that sense of being held to account. Can we imagine a world based on the responsiveness of care that didn't privilege making money over relationship, over taking care and being taken care of, over caring about the things that matter to us? And in one sense that's utopian. It would require such enormous changes. And yet, as I say, with caring, with care ethics, we're just simply starting from where we are. Each moment of care, each experience of caring and cared for, I could say little utopian moments. It's only the other day that I actually found out there's, presumably we all know the etymology of utopia as no place. But there is actually, equally from the Greek, another way of figuring that, which is utopia, which is the good place. And in our experience of our lives as caring and cared for in the widest possible sense, there are so many moments of the good place. which we can hold, which can form the basis for more, something more. A society that recognises the value of care, where fear is something different. And I come back to Kannon, I'll come back to the Heart Sutra. Why is it Kannon who speaks the Heart Sutra? Because it's Kannon who offers us the gift of non-fear as non-separation, as process, as relationship. As in that sense, the good place. And why? Because Kannon hears the cries of the world. That's in Avalokiteshvara's name. Hearing the cries of the world, listening to the cries of the world, responding to the cries of the world. That is the good place.